I was fascinated with my sporting background that, you know, you relate something to a physical improvement, you can see when you're making those improvements, whereas with the brain, it's difficult to do that, isn't it? And so is it as simple, like you were talking about those positive thoughts in the morning, to change behaviours, to change the way the brain works? Is it as simple as that?
Well, the reason I go back to that simplicity is because what I discovered after giving hundreds of talks around the world, and like I'm so excited about this, you know, when you have a light bulb moment and then you change your own life and you're like, oh, I just got to get this to people. But what I worked out is that that's just the first step, is how do I raise awareness? And I do simple things in the beginning, because then if people can't implement those simple changes, how can then you do the rest? So there's more to it than that. For instance, we know that you can build focus, memory and attention using Brain HQ platforms, but if you're really stressed out or you're drinking a lot of alcohol and eating a ton of bad food, it's just really hard to make those big changes that you want to make, because what I know from the brain is that, and I didn't talk about it too much, but alcohol and sugar, they basically make that emotional part of the brain, that old part of the brain, even more reactionary. You're getting relief in the short term, but then you get really stressed out in the long term because of how it's changing the brain. And so I think awareness, and I say that morning routine just as an example so people can leave here and do something tomorrow and practice that and just see how hard it is to just even remember to do that every day, right? And so unless you can do one good thing every day and repeat it for 28 days, you can't then expect to change everything, basically. That's why I do that.
It's amazing, because it seems so simple that the brain dictates things like stress, affects things like addiction, which I'm sure people deal with either directly or indirectly with people they know. If we know this though, and clearly you've spent a lifetime doing it, why can't we change it? Why is it so difficult for us to implement those changes as an industry, as a society, as a human race?
Okay, conditioning. So basically, the brain is a magnificent learning machine, and we've been conditioned to believe what we've been told. And also, I was the same. I developed medications for 25 years. I'm a pharmacist, and I really believed that. And it took me 3 years to change my own mind, and then to implement and then move into this other area and meet all the people that are doing that. So I always basically had my blinkers on, so I can understand why it's so hard to understand that you have this power inside you. So it's just, I call it like the next step. So Steve Jobs always says you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And honestly, Tom, if I hadn't done what I'd already done, I couldn't be here on the stage tonight talking the way I am, because I developed medications. I studied the brain down to its bits and pieces. I went all the way down to amino acids and everything, and publishing big papers and working in companies. I've done it all around the world, but without understanding all the ins and outs of all of that, I wouldn't be able to tell you what I know about neuroplasticity. So I feel like everything's a journey, and just like everyone, we're all in a different part of evolution. And people that really get this and take it on, what they're doing for their family is massive, because you're changing things 3 generations going forward. So just as I told you the bad things, you can also do the good things. So for instance, mirror neurons, which I didn't get into, but mirror neurons sit up here, and the reason that our families keep replicating things over and over is because we copy each other, which is how we learn to speak really fast in 40,000 years of history, is because of those neurons, and they were just discovered recently by Italian neuroscientists. And so that's why we copy bad behaviour too. You see what I mean? So it's like conditioning, and it's hard to recondition things, into a new direction. And that's just part of education and knowledge. It's like smoking 25 years ago. Everyone was smoking. That's how I look at it. So,
I mean, obviously, if you want to learn more about the brain and change the patterns of your brain behaviour, that's one thing. What about if you're trying to help someone else? That can't be easy either, particularly if they don't want help, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's true. But as I said, I did give a talk, actually, I just remembered, for the health department, and I remember giving this growth mindset for performance talk, and I had this one person put up her hand, and she said to me, what if you have a growth mindset but everyone around you has a fixed mindset? I went, Oh my God. Okay. So basically, how I look at it is everything starts within yourself. So unless you're willing to make the changes, don't expect anyone else to. And then because of mirror neurons, they will follow you. So for instance, I can talk about my own family situation once I learned all of this information. I didn't even get to tell you about Michael Meany's work about licking and how we stopped, all of that. But anyway, so basically you can create environments that will help to make people come around in a sense. So I did a podcast with someone about depression and anxiety, and they said, but what if they can't even get out of bed and they don't want to know? And I said, just hold their hand. I know that sounds too simple, but basically from what I know about how everything works, when you hold someone's hand and squeeze them, basically you're getting the release of oxytocin from bonding, and you're getting dopamine release, and then you're promoting the side of that brain to actually start pumping more of our own endogenous neurochemicals, right? And it might take time, but as I said on the radio today, basically you might take someone that might be going further down into a positive direction. From the Harvard Grant study, we know that basically connections and the thing that drives our health and happiness. I know, which is a horrible thing to say after 80 years of research, but that's what they found.
And what about, you've obviously got the science background well and truly covered, and I'm sure a lot of people might have a science background in the audience tonight, but many don't. How much does personal experience play into what you've done as well? You touched on your sister as well and how you dedicate tonight for her, but how much does that affect an understanding for anybody and I guess for you?
Yeah, I definitely think lived experience helps, for sure. It definitely helped for me, but I also think before, when I was studying the brain, I was studying it from an intellectual point of view, reading all the papers and trying to understand why my sister had schizophrenia and what we could do to help her. But when I had my own lived experience, not with schizophrenia, I'm not hearing voices right now, but with depression, then I got to really understand what exactly is happening inside the brain. And that definitely did help for me to drive some of the neuroplasticity techniques and tools that I developed, one for myself, but also that I put in all my books.
What are some of the misconceptions? I mean, I'm sure you've heard it all over your career. What are some of the misconceptions you think there are amongst the public about the brain and perhaps the way it works?
That it's rocket science, that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, which is our fault. Because as neuroscientists, we said the brain was fixed.
And is that a behaviour? Because everyone says, I'm too old to learn anything different.
Yeah, totally.
It's too hard.
Well, so I had a question about this today, and basically we like stagnation and complacency because that keeps us feeling safe. But actually in the long term, it actually is dangerous because the brain, because it's an amazing learning machine, actually wants novelty and wants new things. And as you get older, you should actually be doing newer things. And we tend to always start to cut back on things. And what you'll see, the people that have lived the longest have actually taken up things like, like riding a bike in their 80s and all of that kind of thing. So basically, you should be doing more as you get older, not less. So that's just the brain trying to save energy. And basically, we need the brain to be active to get the motor neurons in our body functioning well and all of those things. We actually need more exercise than we think too as we get older.
I love that idea because I've been guilty of it as well. Too old. I just can't be bothered. It's too hard. I'm doing what I'm doing now. And I loved your quote tonight. Your brain can learn anything if you let it. It's that mindset, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're willing to do it.
Yeah.
Like when you put the maths problem, I went, oh God, this is going to be too hard. It's too difficult.
I know. And I was the same, just saying.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's good to hear.
I only started triathlon at 48. And I was really unhealthy and overweight. So stress had taken over my life completely. So
how hard was that? I mean, was that difficult? Was that something you had to will yourself into? Was it a slow process, or did it happen? Did it happen quickly?
It was me coming back from America to Brisbane when people were riding their bikes, and I hadn't been back in Brisbane for 20 years, and I wanted to integrate back. And all my friends were riding bikes on Sundays and having coffees, and I thought, oh, that looks like fun. I better learn how to use a bike. And then I was up in my bedroom with my cleats on, falling off onto the bed. That's how I started.
Well, I mean, it's great though. Like, you know, you're adopting the practices that you're preaching.
Well, I have to, because I think you can't give these talks or you can't understand it unless you're practicing it. And I saw this with a really wonderful colleague of mine. He's a brilliant neuroplasticity neuroscientist, but he hadn't been doing the work on his body too. And so I think it's hard to deliver the message unless you're out there actually doing it every day. And just from my own perspective, I've never felt this healthy, happy and strong in my whole life, like my whole life. And it comes from the stuff I'm teaching, but also the stuff I understand. I've worked with Wim Hof and a ton of other people that are extreme neuroplasticity people, you know, like the Iceman, David Goggins, the Navy SEAL. So they're like, I am a bit extreme, but they've shown through their work, if anyone's interested, you can go and listen to their work, that we've at least 40% untapped potential, and they've shown it.
I was going to say, the brain, it does seem like the frontier that, you know, we're so in tune with physical and what we can do, you know, with our physical limitations, but the mental side of things
is everything.
And the brain capacity, how much more can we learn? How much more potential is there?
To be honest, I really don't know the answer to that. I think it's totally untapped. Like, we're still living with all of this old brain that keeps people all locked down and stuck and stressed and anxious and depressed and things like that, just because we've never taught people about that. And people aren't, like I say to people, tell me what you did to train your brain today. They can tell me about their Pilates and their yoga and their swimming, but no one can tell me what they're doing to train their brain. And I think that's the frontier that we have to enter now. I think it needs to be in healthcare professionals at the front end of where people are meeting people. I think it needs to be in schools and helping kids do some of this emotional training themselves. I just think there's a lot for us to do to actually spread some of the information to make life just a little bit less suffering.
I was going to say, do you think we need to do more as, you know, widely a medical profession to perhaps, you know, help GPs, doctors to know more about that as well?
Exactly. I mean, they're under a lot of pressure to see patients all the time, and then I think this involves maybe a little bit more than just, you know, a bit more time. I think there's opportunities everywhere to do this, but I really fundamentally believe in the power of people. Maybe I'd be on the front line of a revolution in Paris at some point. I don't know. That was in one of my previous centuries. But basically, I really believe in the power of people, and I just want people to know that they have the power inside them to do this too.
From a sporting context, sorry, selfishly, I work in sport. I guess to get more out of athletes as well, if you can tap into that brain power.
Yeah, well, they've shown that in America.
That's huge, isn't it?
Oh, there's tons of brain trainers over there on the big end sports teams. My friend's was the coach for USC baseball, and he was applying some of these brain training tools with all of his stuff, because baseball's very much a mindset game.
Similar to cricket as well.
Yeah, cricket too.
And we hear and learn about life coaches, career coaches, mindfulness coaches as well. Is that where it's moving, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. In some ways, yeah. I still fundamentally believe, though, understanding how your brain works, how it reacts to stress, becoming aware of how much sugar and alcohol you eat is really some of the fundamental steps you can do too. That are really straightforward and simple. They're not very complicated, and without that awareness, it's really hard to make the changes, you know.
We'll throw it open to the floor in just a moment, but for those that want to learn more tonight, or, you know, read about your work, where's best to go? How do they best access that?
I think my podcast, Shining Mind, I'm very proud of that, and it's based off my book, Smashing Mindset, and it's with a young guy, and I won the pitching competition in Silicon Valley last year, and he was running the podcast, and I said, I need to start a podcast, and so he helped me, and it was really interesting because he's 23, and not a neuroscientist talking to a 54-year-old woman. And it was really interesting because I think it created a really nice conversation because he wanted to understand how the brain works. So the first 10 episodes are what I kind of talked about today. And so you can hear it free. It's on Apple and Stitcher and iHeartRadio. I have a website called selenab.com where I post all my things, and then I also have my book, Smashing Mindset, and I also have a tracing book. And we're about to release our first game that we've built called Trace It, and we're super excited. It's been taking a long time to get the technology right, but hopefully you'll be able to send secret messages to each other, and when you get them, you have to trace them, which means that you're activating your fine motor neurons from a neuroscience perspective, and then that activates the premotor cortex, which is a sneaky way of building back your impulse control.
I mean, it's pretty amazing to have something tangible that you can, put out to people to be able to practice.
Well, I've seen some amazing results. I mentioned to you earlier, I work in child protection and youth justice in Queensland and now with the police, because they weren't aware about ACEs science and that rearresting people can cause more trauma, which makes them more violent and more
susceptible to
to more crime. So we're doing a lot in that space, and to see some of the things where kids that are so traumatised because they've been in multiple homes and multiple sexual abuse, and to see them doing some of these things and then being able to sit there still and understand how their brain works is just incredible to me, which is what gets me up every morning. And we've got a lot of work to do, but I'm really excited about that. ACEs science combined with neuroplasticity, I think is going to hopefully do a little bit of disruption in the mental health space.
Might throw it open. I could keep going, but might throw it open to the floor. We've got a roving microphone, I think, so maybe just raise your hand and we'll move around the room. Perhaps just stand up so everyone can see you.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
This is sort of a pharmacy sort of question as well. I presume you're talking about like a statistical average, just like how people get cancer, some of it's terminal. There's nothing you can do no matter how many times you pray or talk about it or whatever. So just like with, say, schizophrenia, like you could try, brain therapy like 1,000 times on someone, but unless you give them Risperdal or something, they're still going to hear voices, or someone with like ADHD, and
Absolutely.
You try that and it won't work, or
right.
alcohol as well. So
Absolutely, Absolutely, there's a middle way. Where in acute phase, there's no doubt the medications play a huge role. So I'm definitely not advocating against that ever. But what I'm advocating for is an understanding of what's driving it in the first place. So it's not some random thing that people get a basket of symptoms. It actually came from a place of trauma and adverse childhood experiences. All of it has, more or less. So unless we start to change and understand that cause, we're not going to change the outcomes for people that have schizophrenia and bipolar. So from a treatment on an acute chronic situation, of course it's going to take a lot of medication, but also it's going to take an understanding that we can actually do some neuroplasticity training. I know some people are doing that in Melbourne, for example, because they're trying to improve people's cognition using brain training so that they can actually implement some of the things that people are telling them to do more effectively.
Yeah.
But I definitely seen for myself that medications are not the answer totally either, because that's how my sister died.
Yeah.
Because those medications end up just sedating people. They cause horrendous side effects when their doses are escalated over many years.
Yeah.
We've never really tested that in people taking antidepressants for 40 years, what the impact is. So I think there's a middle way, and I really believe in a personalised approach. I think we have to get to personalised medicine as much as we possibly can, because everyone's brain's so different. As you know, for schizophrenia, it's totally a spectrum. It's just a basket of symptoms, and then we give labels to things because they're kind of thrown in there because it's not this and it's not that.
And just really, really quickly, that thing about the childhood thing was quite interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether you think people that have some genetic disposition that was already there have an even stronger impact.
Absolutely.
From bad experience.
So genetically, we know that, especially for alcohol addiction, I can't give you the exact number for schizophrenia and psychosis, but basically we know for sure for alcoholism it's 60% genetically explained. Right? So now, the way I can talk to answer that question is psychedelics. So we always talk about the good parts of psychedelics and people get addicted to the experience. But you know what it does too, is it can actually reveal a susceptibility to schizophrenia and psychosis that wasn't going to maybe present itself at a faster rate, for example, to answer that question. So, for example, what I know is some people might have only had an ACE score of 1 between the ages of 0 and 18, and then they might end up having an abortion or some other traumatic event that happens post-18, and then that can actually then bring out some susceptibility that might have been existing there genetically and epigenetically. So it's just fundamental, like when you understand that, it becomes just so much more simple. Because at the moment it's such a hodgepodge of things that when you understand that it's driven by these things, then unless we change those things, we're not going to change the outcome. And that's what I'm really passionate about, is actually helping people not be scared by it, but just to be enlightened by it, like smoking. And then how do we, just reducing ACE score by 1, not that we'll ever get rid of it, but by reducing, using neuroplasticity and medication and genetic engineering or whatever it's going to be, by 1 might be just enough to tip someone that was going to go really badly down depression, anxiety, into maybe less. And then what we're doing then is also helping all the family members understand the power of this. So, and this has epigenetic possibilities for generations going forward. We're basically breaking the chain on evolution. And that's why it's so hard. It's simple, it's not easy, because we're breaking some massive millions of years of evolution.
Question, I think, from over here.
Yeah, so you spoke obviously about sugar, and you kind of alluded to the way society's kind of pushed fat out of its diet. And you also mentioned your running and your triath training as well. So you're probably aware low-carb, high-fat diets are kind of a big deal, particularly with triathletes at the moment.
Yeah.
The performance outcomes from those studies are pretty consistently showing there's no real benefit to a low-carb, high-fat diet when compared to just habitual carb intakes. But from a cognitive point of view, do you think, or is that an area we need to research in terms of, from a cognitive point of view, is there a benefit to getting people to consume more fat than what they are now, because we've pushed that into the world of low fat, and move away from carbs, being that carbs ultimately, and simplifying, but carbs obviously just get broken down as sugar at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's a great question. Diets is something everyone's got their own thing about. I really believe, once again, that every single body is different. So, for instance, I may not be able to have gluten and someone else can have gluten. So I really think I'm just not a dualist. I'm a non-dualistic person. That's why I put up the middle way. Because I think as soon as you go dualistic, then it's like my way or the highway, and I just don't see that working for anybody. I see that the same for diets. So some people are plant-based, it works really well for them. Some people are keto, helps for epilepsy really big time. Some people are doing whatever. But what I'm just trying to talk to is just overconsumption, where our body is getting way too much energy than it can handle. And as we get older, it's even harder. And the fact that these things like fructose and this is a lot of, it's consumed over a period of time, and alcohol are actually changing the brain. The physical structure of the brain, it's making it harder to implement the changes that you want to change to be happy, healthy and strong. It just makes it harder to do that. Same with cocaine and prescription opioids, where we're inhibiting pain, but in the end we're getting more pain, because I studied that for a long time too. So it's just fundamental. It's always counterintuitive. Sometimes you have to do the hardest yards to get the longest benefit. So I know I didn't really answer what you're trying to say, but you're saying if we now put fat back in to replace and get rid of sugar and then replace it with fat now because we're so deficit, because we've got too much sugar going on, and I don't know the answer to that question in terms of what people can actually do. All I know for myself is I started to take out sugar. Not 100%, still like my donut now and then and all those lovely things. But I did definitely take down a lot of processed food that has sugar embedded in it. I didn't realise low-fat strawberry yogurt was worse than having a can of Coke, for instance. Just to give you one example, and I just gave a lecture in New Zealand about this to the Pacific Islanders, where New Zealand currently has the biggest dialysis hospital in the world from sugar-sweetened beverage-induced kidney failure. So for example, there's one drink over there called Stars. It's got 35 teaspoons of sugar in it, and some of the kids are having 3 a day. And so what they're doing is they're out in the community. This is the New Zealand Heart Foundation, where they're actually taking buckets of sugar and teaspoons and a can, and to show people how much sugar is actually in there. And they've got kids losing all their teeth as well. So this is like a big deal. It's happening in Australia too, and it's one of the leading causes of driving obesity epidemic, including diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and many other things. And I haven't told you about this, but we're about to release this new work in brain metastases and cancer that came from this work as well. So yeah, sugar has a big impact in the brain and the body. That's kind of hidden away.
Thank you for the talk this evening. It's been very informative. I have a question about addiction. We talked about smoking, alcohol, addiction. What's the connection to screen time addiction?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's all related to the same thing. It's called the freeze response and avoiding response. And basically, as you probably know, anyone in here that's watched their favourite TV show, like I watched The Bachelorette with my mother. NCIS, yeah, my daughter binge watches that. I'm a terrible mother. Anyway, so for example, when you're watching your favourite show, and then about 10 minutes before the end of the show, they start to show you the next thing. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that was on, right? So basically, while you're watching that show, your dopamine levels go down. And so then when you're sitting, it's very hard to initiate movement. So once they've got you, next minute you know you've watched 3 hours of television. So the same thing with screen time. Think of us, like when you're scrolling through your Facebook feed or whatever, like you're just going in there to look at one thing, and then, oh my God, I've got to be at work, kind of thing. It's like an hour later. So that's just what's happening inside the brain. The dopamine levels are going down. So it's very similar in terms of an addiction in that way. And also you will do it despite negative consequences, right? You'll text while you're driving, all of these different things. So it has exactly the same phenotypes as an addictive phenotype, basically. And I think it's driving all the same pathways inside the brain. But it's very hard for me to get a rat to do the screen time. That's the only problem. But I could try and do it in humans, but they're very difficult subjects.
I
was just wondering if you have done any research on high sugar diet and the possible link to dementia.
Yeah, well, no, we haven't, but there's no doubt about that. So this is so basically the vascular, I showed you the brain imaging stuff, so that was looking at blood flow. So there's no doubt in my mind about, and this has been shown, right, diabetes and the vasculature is highly correlated with developing early onset, outside the familial forms of Alzheimer's, which is ApoE4 genetic stuff, right? That's the familial form, that's coming in your line. But in terms of lifestyle, it's very well shown that diabetes and changes in your vasculature from lack of exercise, too much sedentary behaviour, bad eating, all of these things are definitely contributing to changes in the way the blood, because you need a lot of blood in your brain because it's so active, is affecting the amount of blood flow in your brain and the amount of toxins that can build up there. So what I think is going to be shown over time, and this is totally hypothesis, but from just what I understand about the brain, is that the human part of the brain goes first in terms of memory and navigation and losing your way. And there's some support by getting these acetylcholinesterase inhibitors to promote acetylcholine to help you think better. But what is the strongest part of the brain is the old part of the brain. And that's where you're processing negative things and stress and all of these other things. And there's no doubt that when you start to lose memory, you get stressed out, people get more anxious, people treat you differently. It's this whole kind of series of things happening that are driving down deficits in the way the brain's going to be processing this. And I see this in people. So someone came up to me once and they said, "Oh, my father's got Alzheimer's, what can I do?" And I said to him, "Just give him a hug." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, they stop getting hugged." And basically, from what I know about how the brain works, because the emotional part of the brain still exists, basically hugging them, they'll feel that emotionally. And so that's the way you can connect. And I know that's not good enough right now, but at least it's better than just putting them away and getting rid of them. And I think we have a responsibility as society to look after our elders. I highly believe that. And I think that I look at that the same way I look at child protection and everything else, elderly protection. If my kids lock me up, they're dead. I've already told them that. But anyway, so I think all of these things play into, so that's why I'm so passionate about this, because you can do this now. Get rid of the stupid sugar out of your life. Start exercising, walk, stop watching TV, it's pointless, except Channel 9 Sports.
Beautiful, that was good. I'm glad you got that in. Yeah, nice. Only for 10 minutes, that's all you need to do.
And The Bachelorette, because that's how I keep my mother company. But anyway, I think these things are totally possible. I've done it for myself. I've been shocked myself, and they're simple. It's not easy. You've got to do it every day. You can't do it twice a week. It's not going to do much for you. And doing it every day can be a bit hard when you've got to go to work. But even if you do 10 minutes of stretching, yoga is going to help you. Yeah, yoga, Pilates, deep breathing, and all of these little things, but you can do them.
Selena, hi. I think I've got a simple question, but
Maybe.
for your brain to make a good decision, where should it be?
Where what, sorry?
Your brain. Where should it be parked?
Where should it be parked?
Yeah. So to make a difficult decision, can you be upset or emotional? So where's parked?
I love that question. So what I do when I do talks to corporations, this is a big deal, right? So people come into your office and you want to tell them off. So I have this strategy called disarming your enemy. So because of the millisecond reaction of the bottom part of the brain, we want to put a brake on there to turn it into 1 second to allow the prefrontal cortex to kick in so it can make a better decision. Because at the moment, you saw with the working memory test and the cucumber, it's off and off to the races. So how do you get power back? Well, you've got to train and rewire that part of the brain, right? So what you do, so you're making a difficult decision. Let's just talk about a difficult decision with your wife. Hello, wife. Or partner or whatever, a child. And you want to tell them no to something. So basically, one thing to do is you take a deep breath and basically you give them a big smile. And they're going to be, oh my God, I was expecting to get in trouble. What's going on here? So you immediately disarm them and they get really calm in the process. So then you can then tell them in a way that is less reactionary from you, and they won't know what to do with that because you've already done the power pose before that, right? You put your arms up, you're feeling dominant. I didn't even tell you that's the dominant part of the animal kingdom. So you're raising your testosterone, you're feeling really powerful and confident. And then you go and smile at someone, and then basically you've biohacked that old part of the brain, and now you have your whole prefrontal cortex engaged, so now you can make really good decisions. So we can do that every day, basically, for ourselves, and you can just have to practice it and see what I mean, and then just try it out, because I think we're all N=1 experiments in some sense. Does that make sense?
Another one just down the front.
Yeah, hi, Selena. Just got a question whether you or any of your colleagues have researched the autistic brain.
Oh, yes.
And given the fact that a lot of people on the spectrum have extreme cases of anxiety and also are emotionally unattached.
Yeah, totally. So basically, I haven't done autism, but I've worked with someone that's done some of this neuroplasticity training, and it's 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for a year with kids on the spectrum, and they do working memory, brain training, they do tracing, and they do other things. And I've seen remarkable things happen in that space. So it's basically, as you're alluding to, they don't have the empathy part of the brain, but tracing actually does help to rebuild some of that too. There's a bunch of people working on that space, basically. And so that helps to calm the brain because what is anxiety? Anxiety is just the emotional part of the brain that's become super wide and reactive over a long period of time. And so when you start to do these daily practices, basically you're calming down that part of the brain and you're starting to reroute it and letting the prefrontal cortex take over again. Yeah, well, we're all genetic, you know. Yeah, totally. But we all are we're all on the spectrum. Hate to tell you, no, but we are. In a way, I understand what you're saying, that autism is a genetic basis, but nearly everything does have a genetic basis, and so the consequence of the behavioural traits you're describing is how their brains but so are each of us, different ways to say someone else. Yeah, exactly. Totally. But so are each of us, have different aspects of that. It's kind of what I'm trying to allude to. You know what I mean? Like each of us are wired completely differently, and you can call it autism and I can call it I've got a stressed out brain. But that wiring is the same kind of concept in a way. So neuroplasticity offers some opportunity in that space. I don't know how much yet because we have to do proper evidence-based clinical trials to look at that, but I have seen it anecdotally with people practicing those principles with parents that have kids on the spectrum.
Just at the back.
Thanks. You spoke about mindset, nutrition and exercise. One of the terms you had up on the slide was sleep, which hasn't been touched on,
yes, yeah.
which I'm really interested in. Perhaps the negative aspects of it, and also I've read that the hours that you get sleep before midnight are far more important than the ones after, even if you do get your 8 hours in, but before midnight. So just curious to know your thoughts on that in 25 words or less.
Sorry, I do speak too much, I agree with you. So basically Matthew Walker's work out of Berkeley has demonstrated for the first time we've actually discovered the lymphatic system of the brain. And it tracks the blood vessels in the brain. So like we have lymph nodes here, we have it in the brain. And what does sleep do? So they demonstrated that sleep is the time when the brain takes all the toxins, because think of how active it is, it's creating dead proteins. The lymphatic system during sleep is open to transport those toxins out of the brain. And they've shown people that are sleep deprived are not able to do that. So that's how you get accumulation of plaques and tangles. So sleep is that important, and then they recommend that you have 7 to 9 hours sleep a night. I can't speak very much to before midnight, after midnight, because there is some genetic basis for people that are night owls and larks. And I've seen that too within families. But you can definitely shift it, for sure. But sleep is fundamental. And when you don't get enough, and then stress is driving that too. Lack of exercise is driving that too. What you eat and drink is driving that too. So they're all wrapped up together, not drinking enough water. All of these things just are foundational, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's how I look at it from a brain perspective. And sleep is, like you could sleep, but if you're still eating badly and then you're taking sleeping tablets, then that's not going to be good for you either. So one thing I want to touch on here is that people are talking to me about sleeping tablets and Alzheimer's. And the thing about sleeping tablets, I prefer exercise to sleeping tablets because, only because, and you know, I'm not saying one or the other, I'm just saying why I say that is because sleeping tablets over the long term target the GABAergic inhibitory neurotransmission in the brain. So you have two major neurotransmitters, glutamate, which is excitatory, and GABA, which is inhibitory. And so it targets that pathway to help you sleep, right, to turn you down. But think about that. If you're doing that through a chemical all the time, then you're going to be changing the glutamatergic neurotransmission system too. So everything's a basic homeostatic device. And I fundamentally believe that the brain has a lot of things that are there to heal us, because it's got billions of circuits and trillions of synapses. And you can even tap into your own DMT. You don't need to go to ayahuasca ceremonies. Just saying.
I think we'll leave it there. I might just finish. Obviously, you're in Adelaide. I think you're doing another lecture here tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
But just tell us what's next for you now, short term and I guess long term.
Oh, God. Oh, my goodness.
Too big a broader question?
You don't really want to know. Well, I fell in love with somebody after divorce. So that was good. It took a lot of brain training, trust me. So that's pretty high on the agenda right this second. Outside that, in terms of science and neuroscience, we're actually fundamentally mapping the neuroplasticity molecular machinery. We've recently discovered that prolonged consumption of sugar drives brain cancer development, and that was a shock, and we're looking at all the tumour microenvironment and how we can target that. We're also developing a mobile app for breaking the stress reward cycle, plus a game called Trace It. I'm also building out my Shining Mind podcast called Women on the Rise, but it's also for men, because I love women and men, and I think everyone, we need to go together. But what I discovered through that process is that I'm trying to shine a light on the beauty of people, because I actually see beauty inside every single person that exists on the planet. It's just been buried under a lot of evolution. And I like to scrape back and find all the diamonds. And I use my podcast to interview people that have made massive change. So, for example, Fiona Simpson is one of the leading prostate cancer researchers in head and neck cancer researchers. And she just discovered that Stematol actually helps to keep these receptors on the tumours. So now the antibodies can bind to them, these really expensive antibodies. She was addicted to heroin in Scotland, ladies and gentlemen, and she shares that on my podcast. And she's been to Cambridge and to Scripps, and her changes are massive, and people like that. So I just like to, it's called Shining Mind because I'm shining a light on the beauty of people and helping people see that anything's absolutely possible once you set your mind and intention to want to have a happy, healthy, and strong life.
It's been a great message that we've all been able to enjoy tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please give Professor Selena Bartlett a round of applause.